I'm not necessarily saying that you pick a specialist CDMO for a program. I'm saying you pick a CDMO that has expertise and experience, because there are CDMOs that are, and I should say you have, in my experience, is CGT, it's nucleic acids, plasmids, DNA, lipids, cap analogs, things like that that really feed into that nucleic acid pipeline. But there are CDMOs that can, or that are big enough that they have multiple sites and multiple teams, and those teams have deep domain knowledge in different spaces, and they might not be a specialist CDMO. They might be generic, they might be general, but they have defined units of expertise. And I think that's it, is what's the depth of expertise? What's the depth of experience that that team has? But to lay on the compliance component to it, what is their agility in compliance? Um, how long does it take them to process a deviation? How long does it take them to, to close CAPAs? There are components like that that, need to feed into this. What does employee turnover look like? Because that really defines domain knowledge. These are the people who work on the floor. And if the turnover is really high, then you're losing those people. Therefore, that it might seem like they have a lot of experience, but they've lost all of that experience because they have a high turnover. So there are some of those components that come into play, and that having a team, a multidisciplinary team doing the selection, your quality, your manufacturing, your R&D team, your program management team, being around the table in making that selection, would enable the organization to pick the right partner. So I wouldn't say it's just go to a specialist. Of course, a specialist is very helpful, but I would say go to deep domain knowledge with agile, GMP, and quality capabilities. That would be my perspective. But I think, Bikash, you've worked with a lot of different sponsors, so you probably have some additional insights or alternative perspectives.
No, I think you're correct. I think you're correct. The trick is, the devil is in the details here. So a drug sponsor is going to, and historically, we've always said this, is that you want to find a company that's really good for the phase of what you do. But then we all know the CMC pain and cost associated with pivoting from a company that's perhaps very good at development to one that's really good at commercial, right? And so we often end up with someone that's somewhere in between, and we attempt to either they're really good at commercial, they're really good at development around that, and we try and prepare for wherever the gaps happen to be. So I think that's just the reality of where we are today in terms of that CDMO selection conundrum out there. I do think there are some universal truths around CDMOs, regardless of modality, whether it's small molecule or large molecule or complex large molecule or complex generic, it doesn't really matter. But from a compliance perspective and a CMC perspective, having clear understanding around roles and responsibilities, as you've said, brutally honest, as you begin this relationship. So when you start a development engagement with a CDMO, if you're a cell and gene company, maybe you may have intermediates here that you have developed along the way as part of our product. You should be thinking about how am I going to introduce these into my CDMO in a way that protects my IP, right? So you should have a strategy in place. If you don't, then you should engage a CDMO early on in your development agreement to talk about how IP is going to be managed. Because if they become part of your process design and your troubleshooting and your process scale up, they're going to want to be able to leverage that experience and knowledge for other customers. You may or may not want them to do that. So you should get those things out of the way up front with them. So I think there's some universal pieces there. On the compliance side, it's more making sure that you have absolute clarity when quality issues, perhaps not directly related to your program, arise. Let's just say, as you said, deviation evaluation. Perhaps the root cause analyses are poor, and this is a very universal risk in any CDMO you choose. The laboratory investigations and the deviation explanations are not done they're maybe not done to what you would expect them to be. That represents a risk in your pre-approval inspection. and is
And
one of the largest
yep.
reasons for failure. So